Victor Davis Hanson. We had this election. People say it's a great win. Democrats say it's a blue wave. What do you see in this election?
Well, I'd see it in a historical context, and that's not, I'm trying to be an optimist. Barack Obama lost 63 seats, 6 senators, and was reelected. Bill Clinton, I think, lost 52, 8 senators, reelected. So zealots and partisans relax in a midterm, and people who were defeated get re-energized. That's common. But I think there were a couple of disturbing things, and that is the aftermath of the election. It just seems that every time there's a recount in Arizona and Florida or even Georgia, or especially where I am in California, 4 seats that were won and then lost. And it's kind of the opposite of what Napoleon said at Austerlitz. You know, he said at 11 o'clock I've lost Europe, at 3 o'clock I won it. Well, I thought on election day we'd won more. We'd only lost 26 or 7.
Do we ever win seats that we were losing 5 days later? I can't think of many.
No, I think maybe 20 years ago when older people were the absentee ballots, but now it's the SEIU, the mobilized people, and that Democrats are much better at it than Republicans, and that we thought we could learn. The other thing in these very close races where we lost some good people, we've got this missing 4 to 5. The so-called deplorable, the Trump-based parole voters, whatever, they were there. But now there's going to be a great discussion. Where do you pick up the missing 5% that would have won you some of these good Senate seats? Is it to appeal to the African American community and say, I think Trump might want to consider that, go into the inner city and say, you know what, I may have said things, you may have said things, we didn't get along, but I want you to have leverage over your employer. I want you to have a choice of jobs. I gave you an opportunity in an economy, and I think you're going to take advantage of it. And I think that's what I'm worried. I want you to be powerful. And I think he could save the Latino community. When we close that border and make it legal and meritocratic, guess what? Your communities can have AP in the classes. They don't have to have bilingual education. Your kids are not going to be bullied by gang members from Central America. And you're going to be in such demand that your wages are going to climb, as they went 3% this year. And then we have that other missing, I don't know, maybe you know better than I do, and that's the proverbial, I don't know who they are, but the cable liberals keep talking about the suburban women that are turned off, and we've lost them. Maybe so. I don't know when he said Stormy Daniels was horse-faced, maybe that turns them off. I don't know, but there's 3 to 4%, and that you don't need it all in one place. You can get 1% here too. He's very close, but he's going to need a little bit of boost if they have a credible candidate in 2020.
Isn't part of the problem, maybe it's in the suburbs, the way the media frame this debate? They don't even frame a debate.
No, they don't frame a debate.
Now, the last 6 months, the president's been called Hitler. His administration has been compared to the Third Reich.
Yeah.
He's been accused of creating internment camps for immigrants.
Yeah.
That would actually be FDR, but you know, who's counting? He's been accused of being a racist because he wants to secure the border. He's been accused of being anti-Semitic, despite the fact he's the greatest president, I would argue, for the Jews and the Jewish people in Israel that we've ever had. And he has a Jewish daughter and son-in-law and Jewish grandchildren. He's been called things I've never heard a president called in my life, and it gets worse and worse and worse on cable TV, out of the Democrat Party. Could it be that that has some impact on the 2-3%?
I think it has a lot. When I was saying that he needs an extra 3 and 5, that's working within a system in which 93% of the press coverage the first 100 days was negative from NBC and MSNBC and CNN. So when he gets at the rallies and Trump says, look up there, fake news, I don't say he's demagoguing. I say to myself, wow, these impressive bylines told us that Anthony Scaramucci was involved with a Russian hedge fund when it was a lie, or Donald Trump Jr. knew of the WikiLeaks trove and not true, or that Donald Trump knew of this meeting, not true, or that James Comey was going to come into Congress and refute all of their private, not true. Then I look at Anderson Cooper and I think the scatology that he mentioned, or this, remember the religion editor for CNN? He said Trump is a piece of, we haven't seen that before, or Michael Hayden or James Clapper calling the president either, in the case of Clapper, treasonous, or Hayden invoking the Third Reich, or that Julia Joff saying that He's radicalized more people, all without pushback. So this all came from CNN. And we're not talking about Kathy Griffith with the decapitated head or the jokes about Trump crashing a jet. There's a whole corpus of examples that we don't hear about, but we have privilege if you want to take the effort to learn about it. So when he says, look at those people, he has grounds to do that.
And yet, this president has been relatively passive when it comes to action on the media. John Adams, Sedition Act, locked up journalists, Abraham Lincoln's executive order, when the New York newspaper printed a fake presidential proclamation. He ordered his generals to arrest the editors and the journalists, and they shut down almost 300 papers. Whatever you think about it, that's what he did. Woodrow Wilson set up a whole intelligence operation against the media and the New Sedition Act of 1918. You've got FDR going after publishers. You got Obama going after reporters. Trump hasn't done any of that.
No, he has an effect psychologically on the journalists because he conveys the idea that he doesn't have respect for them. He has contempt because they violated their journalistic ethos. And for them, that psychology of being rejected by the president hurts them more than the actual deeds that you recited. Remember, Obama went after the AP reporters. He went after James Rosen at Fox. Remember that he actually said on the campaign trail, you should debate Sean Hannity. I think he said, you'll tear him up. If Trump said that you'll tear somebody up. So it's for them, it's something about Trump, his speech, his mannerism, his appearance. It's not just journalists either. He is an affront to their cultural and social sensitivities of what is proper and improper.
Could it be his very existence? Because he fights back, he calls them out by name, he'll go after the media outlet and he'll say fake news in this particular organization is the enemy of the people?
I think so. I mean, we're accustomed to sources say, an anonymous, an unnamed person said. We know in a lot of those cases that just didn't happen. A person writes a creative story and calls it journalism. And then they hide behind this facade that we are journalists and we're professionals and we're from a hollowed Edward R. Murrow tradition. It's true, but it's like a chain. The weakest link destroys it. They haven't done anything in their generation to honor the people who gave them that tradition. And they're actually traitors to that tradition. A guy like Jim Acosta goes to those press conferences with Sarah Sanders, and his point is, how can I virtue signal to the people in the room that I'm morally superior? How can I make her stutter or make her pause? Or how can I tell my bosses that I'm part of the resistance? Or how can I get the CNN brand name is out there on front? It's not to say to the American people, I got to clarify, I got to find out what the President of the United States wants. That's not the purpose of why he's there.
I want to pursue this further when we return. We'll be right back. CNN, Jim Acosta bring this lawsuit. They hired Ted Olson, who was a former Reagan official, his partner, Ted Boutros. These are Supreme Court litigators. I read the brief. I think it's preposterous. I mean, let's go through this a little bit. CNN has multiple reporters at the White House who have these hard passes. Jim Acosta can make a request every day to go in. He just doesn't have a hard pass where he can come in willy-nilly. Presidential press conferences started with Woodrow Wilson. Is there anything in the Constitution that compels a president to hold a presidential press conference, to call on somebody from CNN, to call on Jim Acosta? Is there anything that compels any of this?
No, there's not. And Jim Acosta can't take his shoes off and walk around barefooted either, because there's protocols and norms of behavior in every endeavor. I can't get on an airliner and be a stewardess and wear a pro-Obama or pro-Trump hat. They have the right to say, in this particular area, there's protocol. I was a professor for 35 years, and if I had hijacked a class the way he hijacks a press conference and just sermonized or pontificated, I would be called up to the dean, and he would say, you have freedom of expression, but not to violate.
Do you think a lawyer in the Supreme Court who conducted himself the way Jim Acosta did would be able to just continue to go on and on and on in the Supreme Court? He'd be thrown out and held in contempt.
Yeah, he'd be held in contempt and thrown out, especially if he argued, especially if he got in physical contact with a bailiff or somebody.
Well, what do you make of their argument? But it's vigorous, aggressive freedom of the press, and the president doesn't just like them. Does Jim Acosta advance the cause of the press and freedom of the press and information to the American people?
No, he doesn't. I mean, we all give lectures, so we go through this. Everybody who gives a lecture, a teacher, a public speaker knows that there's 8 or 9 good questions. The purpose of the question is to elicit information, clarification of a point made, and there's always one person or two who pontificate, and they say, before I ask, and we always say, please ask the question, and they will not ask their question. They want to hector you, and then finally you say, will somebody please get him off the stage, or will somebody make him ask a question? And that's all it is. And he's dressed this up in the First Amendment, and that he's some kind of wounded fawn or a martyr to the cause of the resistance. And he's not. He's doing disservice to the colleagues around him, who he's monopolizing their time. He's destroying the decorum of the press conference. And the irony, of course, is there's been no president that's been more transparent than Donald Trump. You yell at him, you scream at him, and he'll turn around. Really well-known journalist said to me once, I don't think I can vote for him. I said, why? He said, in front of a debate, I just walked up to him. There was no staff, there were no prep books, and I just talked to him. And then I thought that was great. But he was saying there were no barriers, no substations between Trump and the public. And so Acosta got what he wanted. He got a very transparent, accessible president. And yet he's not acting like a journalist, and he knows it. And this is not just Jim Acosta. Remember, Jim Rutenberg, I think, from the New York Times, said this is an age in which we require partisanship. And I think Christian Amanpour said we can't be neutral. We can be truthful, but we cannot be neutral.
There's a fellow by the name of Matthew Pressman.
Yeah.
And he's a professor. And he's written a book that just came out. And the subtitle of his book is Liberal Values But Not Liberal Bias. And I read the book. And I'm unconvinced. I'm convinced what he said about the 60s and 70s, the media decided then it's not enough to just report objective fact, that you need to present it in an interpretive form with liberal values. That doesn't mean there isn't that doesn't mean there is liberal bias. And yet we see it all the time, don't we? Every survey, you just mentioned one, 93% negative on Trump. But it's not just Trump, they're negative on conservatives, they're negative on Republicans, and they bring some of the most preposterous members of Congress onto their programs. And they make those decisions too, right?
I think it gets down to a fundamental philosophical idea that they feel that their noble ends, and I think that we agree those ends are sort of a radical egalitarianism, require any means necessary to achieve them, in a way that Republicans and conservatives, their means are more selfish, because liberty is not as an exalted virtue as equality. Sort of the French Revolution versus the American Revolution. And therefore they feel we can violate canons of behavior, we can scratch our nails on the Supreme Court door. What would they have done if they broke it into the door? Would they have swarmed the Kavanaugh family? We didn't think. They can stand up and disrupt, and this is all for a noble cause and therefore justified. And if a Republican did it, it would be for this, you didn't build that crowd, or now's not the time to profit people. And so it's been age-old, it's throughout Western civilization, but I'm worried. I think that we now have these force multipliers, social media, the internet, great wealth, and we're reaching a critical mass.
I'll give you another example of the left. When it comes to the Second Amendment, they'll say things like, well, you know, the framers of the Second Amendment didn't know about semi-automatic weapons. They didn't know about sniper rifles. They didn't know about this. They didn't know about that. It's muskets. Therefore, we can regulate whatever we want. Okay, well, let's talk about the First Amendment. There was no TV, there was no radio, there was no cable, there were no satellite. And yet it's a preposterous argument, isn't it? And yet when it comes to the Second Amendment, it's an argument that they make. When it comes to the First Amendment, anything goes except what they disagree with, like conservative talk radio and Fox News, and they don't like necessarily bloggers on social media. They want to regulate the internet. They want to get rid of conservative talk radio. So they're really not for freedom of the press, are they?
No, I think we're seeing something unique in the last, I think the Obama administration encouraged people to come out of the woodwork. And I think we're seeing not just the traditional left-wing assault on the Second Amendment. I think they're going after the Fourth and Fifth Amendment and the First Amendment because they don't believe in free speech. They have this new term called hate speech. And somebody can arbitrarily determine what you say is either homophobic, racist, protectionist, nativist, etc. And therefore you can't say it. That's pretty much institutionalized on campus. We've seen with matters of sexual assault or accusations of such, you don't really have due process in a lot of places in corporations, the workplace, or on campus. And so I don't believe that I think they feel that the Bill of Rights, unlike the old ACLU, the new ACLU believes that's an impediment to a progressive future.
Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, every week, you can see me most weeknights on Levin TV. Just go to crtv.com/mark, crtv.com/mark, or call 844-LEVIN-TV, 844-LEVIN-TV. We'd love to have you in our community over there. Professor Hanson, I want to get into this immigration issue as it relates to this election we just had. You know, I can remember the second term of Reagan. He won massive popular vote. Same with his first term. Massive electoral college victory. In fact, George H.W. Bush won California by a significant amount. California's gone. Other states are gone. Arizona's now purple, moving to blue. New Mexico's more blue than it is purple. Colorado's blue. Colorado used to be red. Nevada's blue, used to be red. And they're turning other states. You look at Texas. The vote out of Texas was not great. We lost 3 or 4 members of Congress. Even Abbott, who's enormously popular, and $100 million wasn't spent against Abbott, he got 55, 56% of the vote. At the lower levels, the Republicans got blown out in some of these counties too. Every major metropolitan area now is blue. You don't have enough rural voters to balance that. Are we in big trouble?
Well, I think in the short term we are, because the Democratic Party is a pyramid now. It's a medieval party of very wealthy. All the big fortunes are no longer in mining or farming or gas and oil. They're in high-tech, Silicon Valley, you know, Warren Buffett, the Facebook people, the Google people, the Amazon people. And that's the fuel of this. And then a professional elite beneath them, and then we have the impoverished, and many of them are recent immigrants, and they work hand in glove, and they flip these states that were red and purple into blue. And it's a coalition between, I call them the suburban elites and very poor people. And it's funny though, Mark, where I live in California, very poor southwest Fresno County, the people who drive the Democratic Party don't want to live with the people they count on their votes, because they feel that socially, culturally, educationally, whatever, they're not comfortable with them. So that gives us hope, because the Republican Party now is a workers' party, entrepreneurial, middle-class party. And one thing we know about people of that class, they feel familiar with, and they like people of different races and different classes. So it's easy. It's a Republican congressman from Ohio is probably going to be more accessible than a Bay Area congressman, even though they're very different politics. Shut the border and let the engine of assimilation, integration, intermarriage work. And I think in 20 years, this is why I'm optimistic long-term, very pessimistic like you short-term, we'd have a replication of this Italian-American experience where if your name's Cuomo or Giuliani, we can't predict your political affinities. But short-term, we've got to shut the border, and we've got to get back to the melting pot and junk this salad bowl.
But this issue of assimilation, I find that's where it's different.
Yeah.
And that's what worries me 20, 30 years out. Private institutions don't put assimilation, you know, PRIS 1 for English, 2 for Spanish, that sort of thing. We have affirmative action plans in the government. They don't push assimilation. The EEOC, we have it at the state level too. But even more than that, we have a Democrat Party that is committed to balkanization.
Oh.
The way their leaders talk, the way they govern, they don't want assimilation because of the very reason you say.
Yeah.
Because assimilation works against their ideology and throws them out of office.
And their ideology, by, I think what you're suggesting is their ideology on its own facts and merits can't get 51% of the electorate. So they have to change the electorate. And that means bring in voters that have an instant grievance. It's pretty crazy when a person from Oaxaca crosses 1 inch into America, then plugs into the whole affirmative action grievance industry, even though he's never been an American. We've never done anything oppressive to somebody in Oaxaca. And we saw the Elizabeth Warren fiasco, the Ward Churchill, stuff like that. So there are limits to identity politics just because it's getting to the level of DNA badges. And it's contrary to the whole liberal idea of Martin Luther King, the content of our character. It's all about the color of our skin and our superficial appearances. But the revolution always devours its own. We're in sort of a committee of public safety, Robespierre. When you saw that hearing, poor old Dianne Feinstein reminded me of a Bourbon king trying to deal with Spartacus, And,
especially the Bourbon part.
Yeah.
We'll be right back. One of the persistence problems is education, academia. It's really, 90-95% in one direction from an ideological point of view. It seems to me with these colleges and universities, they have like an oligopoly.
Yeah.
What do we do about this?
Well, it used to be sort of esoteric, and that was a problem within the university, but now it's permeated into the society because the entire demography, we're getting these late 20-somethings that are graduating in 6-8 years, and to the extent they do, a lot of them have anthropology or social science degrees. They're not employable. They have this staggering $70,000, $80,000 debt. They can't buy a home, they don't get married, they don't have children. It affects the entire country. And I think the universities are largely to blame. They need to be a truth of advertising. When somebody comes in there saying, this is how much money you will borrow, this is how much interest you will pay, and this is the chance, the likelihood this major will get you a job. And we're just going to be honest with you. They're not even subject to the laws that used car salesmen are. They've got to be very candid about that. And then we can't ask the 70% or 65% that don't go to college to subsidize those who do. So we need more trade schools. We need the federal government probably to get out of it, because by guaranteeing those student loans, the university's been jacking up tuition, diversity jars, assistant provosts for inclusion, stuff, rock climbing walls. They're jacking up the rate of tuition and cost over the rate of inflation. Get back to an idea that it used to be we teach you two things: to be inductive in the way you think, and a body of literature, science, math, philosophy, so you can be informed. And what your politics were your own business. But now we're turning out an arrogant, indoctrinated cohort, and they're ignorant, because I'm not sure that a BA means that they're any more educated than somebody who's working on a farm in Fresno County.
I think this is one of the keys to the survival of the republic, really. The educational system, both at the public school level and at the college and university level. And I think those are great ideas. I also think the states that primarily subsidize these state-run colleges and universities, particularly those with Republican governors and legislatures, really need to step up.
Yeah.
And we hear about diversity all the time, except when it comes to more of a pro-American principles, pro-American founding arguments in these colleges and universities. You have people who want to speak at these universities, who are shouted down, who are attacked, who have a different viewpoint. It's like the last place of the Soviet Union. These are supposed to be academic freedom and free speech. It's the opposite of that.
Well, they believe that the family, the religion, the institution, the corporation, whatever, is all biased. So they have you for 4 or 6 years. So they can be biased to counteract the larger bias. But the fact is that these institutions that are supposedly biased, as you know, are becoming progressive as well. But it's very hard. I was a classics professor. It's very hard to teach Latin and Greek grammar or history of Western culture or Thucydides or Aristophanes versus, let me just tell you about myself and what I had to put up with today and what George W. Bush did to me or what Donald. That's easy. And a lot of we kind of make it too difficult. A lot of this watering down the curriculum are people who are not educated, they're not trained well, and they just want to vent and rant. And I'm getting to the point where I think tenure is really a questionable institution.
When we come back, the big question. Victor Davis Hanson, the big question. Next 5 to 10 years. Country going this way or the country going this way?
Well, I think we're in an 1861, 1968 moment. So optimistically, you and I hope that America will be the first truly multiracial society in the history of the world that's worked. So we won't look anywhere like the ancestors, but it won't matter, because we'll be united by a shared ideology, commitment to constitutional government. If that doesn't happen, and very easily could not happen if we demagogue the identity politics and other issues, then we're going to go the route 1861, what could have happened after 1968. But something like the Balkans or Rwanda or something in the Austria-Hungary or Ottoman empires, where we identify by our superficial appearance first and our loyalty to the common collective investment in America. And to make the right choice, we really have to remember where we came from, and we have to claim Jefferson, Lincoln as our own. And people that died in Shiloh really do belong to people who came from Oaxaca.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
You too. See you next time on Life, Liberty, and Levin.